Olá a todos,
Hello, everyone. Hello, guys. Welcome to our online conversation. We are going to talk about collaboration, and it's part of the collaboration discussions here at Paulista Avenue. We are going to talk about traditional and digital models, and we need to know how to manage businesses in order to distribute power among workers. We don't focus on profitability, but on sustainability. So in order to follow these models, we see it as a doable way to offer people the chance to have fair paid jobs and access to corporation. So we're going to talk about cooperative platforms and towards a sustainable future. So we have travel shows, Rafael Schumer and Camila. Travel shows is a researcher, writer, and he founded the platform Cooperativism. He also teaches at the School of New York City. He also has published several books, and one book specifically that approaches this concept of collaboration and how to combine the digital economy. He's a teacher at Spain and a member of a Beckman Bench Society at the University of Harvard. Rafael Grumer is a critical studies professor at the University of Toronto, and he's also responsible for the Platform Collaboration Institute. He coordinates groups at Mark Luhan. Camila Luconi, she's a manager, and in management, business management, she is also specialized in finance and sustainability, collaboration, a professional in collaboration, sustainability, diversity, and organizational culture. She's also a professor at the University of Cooperative and Platform Research Studies. I am Sibeli. I have a background and a degree in history. I've been working at SESC since 2011. We are having simultaneous translations from English to Portuguese, Portuguese to English, with Orientes translations. We have Rodrigo, Dominique, Ana Luisa, and Annie Peternelli, and also sign language with Camila and Tabata. So you can start with you can access our platform at www.sesc-avenidapaulista.com.br. You just add Sesc Avenida Paulista. Make sure you do that. So I will hand it over to Trevor, and Trevor will start our informal conversation. Then I will hand it over to Rafael and Camila. I'm not sure the correct order after Camila and Rafael, but feel free, guys, to speak freely, okay? All right, Trevor, you can go ahead.
So you want me to start with a longer introduction? Because I thought that Camila might be first, or should I go first? Yeah, do you want me to go first?
A menos que vocês queiram mudar, podem.
Unless you want to change the order, it's
no,
fine,
it's totally
guys.
Fine. Yeah, great. Well, thank you for having me. Really a pleasure. And yeah, so I can say a little bit about what motivates our work. And I think over the last 8 years in working and putting some flesh on this idea of platform cooperatives that I developed in 2014. I can tell you a little bit about what we have done in this period of time. So first of all, like, what is all of this work responding to? And it's really two things, right? Like, on the one hand, you have labor platforms in the gig economy that have shown to be very unsafe for workers, with workers being underpaid, having most dignity lost in that workplace, an extreme opacity in that workplace where you don't really know who your boss is, who to talk to, and so on. Workers are underpaid and very isolated and have difficulties organizing, so they have their labor rights are stalled, right? So these are some of the problems that we saw very early on in 2015, really, right? And the question was like, how do you respond to that? And so we had, I convened conferences here at the New School, where I'm a professor here in New York City, and since 2009, right, thinking about digital labor. And we found that, there are many responses you can have in the situation. Of course, first, you need to have like a real analysis of what is happening, right, in the gig economy. And then you can think about responses, right, which academia is usually not so good at. So we made a point of really focusing on the response and on these alternatives. And of course, there are many, right? So, this is something we noticed right away. I think this was clear from the very beginning that whatever you can come up with will not be panacea, will not be a silver bullet, right? So if it comes to unions or to regulations or to corporate social responsibility, right? Like setting standards and trying to uphold these companies to those standards. All of that has to be seen in tandem, right? And very much working together with social movements and embedding this in the political struggles of the day, right? So we introduced platform cooperatives as one alternative, which are essentially, to make it simple for those of you who are not familiar with this at all, is essentially an entirely different beast of a digital startup. So a company that is run cooperatively, which means that the workers all have a vote in the operation and development of this business, and they co-own the platform, right? So platform cooperatives are businesses that sell goods or services, but primarily through a website, a mobile app, or also a protocol, right? So very much embracing DAOs and the Web3 stuff as well. And unlike traditional companies, they are not motivated by shareholders, which are driven by profit. The co-ops are owned and operated by the users and workers, so they're really owned and operated by the people who depend on them most, right? So we see this with labor, right? So I started with these two hands. So it's on the one hand, you have the labor platforms, and on the other, you have, let's say, a democratic internet, right? The idea that the internet should be more democratic, that social media platforms should be more democratic, and that the users who depend, the users and everybody really who depends on a digital platform should also have a say in how it's run, right? So that was sort of the starting point. And the platform cooperatives are really driven by the 7 cooperative principles, which are the North Star for the entire cooperative movement worldwide. And since we started to do this work, there is now a whole ecosystem that developed over the last 8 years. We collected 1,660 articles and papers on our website and our library, focusing only on platform cooperatives, right? So there's a whole research field that developed focusing on this. There are political parties that have taken up platform co-ops. So 4 major political parties like the Labour Party, the Communist Party in Kerala, India, the Social Democrats in Germany, and others have made this into their policy turned this into their policy directives. There are around, I mean, we are aware of over 500 platform cooperatives in 49 countries right now. So these are sort of some of the, I guess, milestones that we can describe. And the conference in Rio that Sibeli started this event with is basically part of a long line of conferences. So this is our 9th conference focusing and bringing together the different stakeholders in this movement at an annual conference, right? So other conferences took place in Hong Kong, in Berlin, and most of them in New York City, right? We started it in New York City in 2015. We're working with 62 partners, partner organization in 60 countries. So it's very, very global, and there are many experiments going on all over the world, right? Some of them institutionally recognized, so really, you know, calling themselves platform cooperatives, also something that we find in Brazil, while others, you know, might be platform cooperatives and act like it, but are either not aware of it or don't associate themselves in this way at all, right? There are a lot of legal obstacles in many countries, like in Japan or in Indonesia, where the law just makes it very hard to actually officially function as a platform cooperative. In some countries, people use other legal incorporation, but then act like a platform co-op. So they might use the Delaware Limited Liability Corporation, for example, to start platform co-ops, simply because their law doesn't allow them to function. There are global south, global north issues going on here as well, right? So I'm very curious to hear more what Camilla has to say. I think response to the problems that might be in just simply creating this sort of digital infrastructure to facilitate these kind of projects in the global south might well be solved with federation. So with creating shared digital infrastructure that can you know, then be used all over the world, as we see already with examples like eva.coop, which is a platform co-op that is you know, offering taxi services, a taxi platform through the blockchain in many countries. The Drivers Cooperative will have big news in January. I'm not sure I'm spilling the beans here too early, but they will actually create shared software that taxi co-ops all over the world will be able to use. And there are many other efforts in that vein as well. So that might be a response to that. But I jumped ahead too much, maybe. There are also, you know, this playing out. I think it's important for the people who come as novices to this, that this is playing out in the care sector, in transportation, in agriculture, very importantly, and of course in transportation. So and then basically in like almost everything you can imagine. So like there are many, many artists using this. There are freelancers, right, who help themselves by organizing themselves in platform cooperatives. And yeah, so there's a lot more to say. We have regulation is, I think, really crucial. And I think we will hear from Raphael about this as well. We published a policy paper last year and really developed 12 points together with the Berggruen Institute. PCC published this policy paper where we developed 12 points that especially municipal policymakers can put into place to support this work, right? So we have a real strong investment in municipal policymakers, because I think in so many countries we see that the federal government, you know, certainly in the United States, where I'm speaking from right now, that is the case, you know, is, you know, relatively dysfunctional, right? So we see much more hope in municipalities. And so we tailored our policy suggestions, and we can talk about them. I don't know if this is going too quickly in too much detail, but I would be happy to address those. I think, again, like for people who come as really new to this, right? So we should probably mention, at least give like 2 or 3 examples. There are, I think people are really excited right now about Web3. So there are data cooperatives that are developing all over the world, but there are large-scale platform cooperatives with some 35,000 members, like you see with SMART in 9 European countries, helping freelancers to benefit from the rights that are afforded to employees. We can talk about Stocksy, which has roughly 1,000 photographers from 65 countries sharing a platform. We can talk about here in New York City, the belly of the beast, right? Drivers Cooperative has now 7,500 drivers, thereby within a very short period of time as a taxi cooperative, becoming the largest worker cooperative in the United States, right? And so you see many of these are, some of these are very large, and then many of them are small, right? So we have Up and Go also here in New York City, which is a domestic home cleaning platform, and that consists of 3 worker cooperatives that are each around 10 people, right? 10, 12 people. So some of them are very small. Yeah, maybe that's a good start. I don't know. I mean, there's so much more to say. Maybe it's more fun to do this interactively. But I think you saw, maybe I laid out a little bit the lay of the land here. So like what it responds against, right? So I think it's a fight for rights in the gig economy. It's also a fight for a democratic internet, right? And those are quite not always the same populations interested in this, right? Also from country to country, very different. It's an extremely global movement. So we're super excited about the developments in Brazil, and they are beyond the amazing work that Rafael Groman has done. Also should point to the work of Rafael Zanata as well, right? Who has written a very, very detailed report about the development of platform cooperativism in Brazil, right? So we can share that as well. We published that together with ITS, and Rafael was a fellow in our research institute. Maybe I just stop here and we just take it a bit more interactive and dialogical. There's lots more to dive into.
Muito obrigada, Trevor. É prazer.
Thank you so much, Trevor. It's such a pleasure to hear you today and to be together in this platform, right? To be able to talk about this topic. So Sesc Avenida Paulista has been exploring this topic ever since last year. So we think that we can move forward and we can deep dive into this topic. So I will hand it over to Rafael maybe, or Camila, who wants to go first? Okay, I'll go first. Cool, guys. So I think I'd like to know a little bit more about the institutionalized cooperativism, which is where I come from. Actually, I come from the world of sustainability. I was a volunteer. I've been working with a focus on creating a better world. I used to work in this company, and when I first joined this company, people talked about the co-ops, and they said that in the co-ops we could do things better and we could go beyond the corporate world. and I got a master's degree on sustainability. I focused on ESG and cooperativism. So when I first learned about it, I fell in love with it. This is the problem when you are a researcher in this area. You fall in love with it. You end up falling in love with it. So I felt deeply in love with this theme, and I can't help it, really, I can't. So anyway, I'd like to talk to you about my story, what made me fall in love with this area, the connections between cooperativism and ESG, and also what we can do. It's an invitation, by the way, what we can do in order to learn from these platforms. And this is what I did. I learned a lot from these platforms on a daily basis. I worked in this co-op that started a digital transformation process. So I went from a sustainability scenario into a digital scenario, and I tried to understand what the future would be like. And then I came across the platform, the cooperative platform topic. So I started getting to know people in San Francisco. I had coffee with them. I remember one of them even knew Trevor, and we carried out a study on digital democracy, and I was engaged in this study with him. And nowadays, I still work with this, and I keep deep diving into this world because it's an inspiration for me, and I want to know even more about it. So anyway, in regards to history, how do co-ops start, right? We need to think about how do they start. They are a little rebellious. They want to think out of the box. And I think they are more resourceful as well. So on the other hand, you have people that are not so resourcefulness. But once you are inspired and you decide to join forces, you can do more. And the Rostendale pioneers, they were inspired by the socialism utopia, and they all dreamed of this society in which everyone could contribute somehow. But anyway, when the co-op arose, they wrote the 7 principles. Some of them said, you know, you were not allowed to drink, you know, these things back then. But anyway, I think things evolved ever since. And if we were able to implement everything that works, the purchasing and selling model, and also the social model. I also work with this course. I am one of the coordinators in this course at Porto Alegre University. And according to this course, we say that the cooperative principles, they are about dreaming, about bringing people together, about sharing values. But sometimes, of course, people, they have different values and they think differently. Some people, they focus on metrics. Some people focus on their dreams, on horizontality, on democracy. So they focus on those things, on inclusion. But I think that the co-ops, they have these 2 classic pillars. And I think we have I would say, a healthy conflict, but we need to focus on these 2 pillars. We need to co-op I know we need to have a economic foundation to exchange something, but we can never forget the social part of it. And I personally like some authors such as Frank Stack. Frank wrote something in 1973, and he said it could be seen as a doctrine. I got this bus and I went to the countryside of Argentina. I was there visiting cities where they had their own water, their electricity, everything was shared. And it's a way to see the world from a different perspective. It's a way to organize a society differently. But it can also be a way to organize society from an economic viewpoint. So without so much interference of the capitalism world. So anyway, it's important to bear that in mind. We have the traditional co-ops, but in the traditional co-ops, they may be influenced by other principles. The younger ones that are in the platforms, they need to understand the DNA and to look back and understand how things work, especially when you grant credit to co-ops. They may think that these co-ops, they are not positive, but they can contribute with fundings. They are providing financial services. So it's based on values, it's based on mutual collaboration, it's based on helping people. So you are being fair enough, and you are trying to decrease the social gap by granting funds to the ones that need. And I think we must bear that in mind, that there is the social aspects, but also the economic aspects. And we need to become more professionals as well. As we cannot only focus on the social pillar, but also on the economic pillar. We need to focus on the economic pillar. So we need to talk about purpose, sustainability, and also we are here to make a difference, in the world. We need to look back at the past, but also dream about the future. If you are new now into this area, there are several things you can look into. The former president of Uruguay once said, the co-ops are here to distribute wealth. We have a lot of inhabitants in Latin America, but the GDP is only was only 1.5, growing at 1.5 rate. Anyway, so we have some studies in Brazil in which the GDP is more balanced where you have more co-ops. This is incredible. You have a better GDP in places where you have more co-ops. So anyway, it's hard to believe that the power of co-ops, and people even make more money and their salaries are higher. One of the biggest banks in Brazil has a huge social gap, and we need to make a equal society. We need to fill this social gap through co-ops. And 70% of everything that we eat in Brazil is produced by co-ops.
So this is part of our daily routine. We think about the agribusiness, think about the big business, but according to the rich people, only talking about so we a lot of what we get from fruits and vegetables from a familiar agriculture. Besides that, I already mentioned a few important points regarding the cooperativism, but we know it's kind of it gets along with how the Brazilian economy gets organized. Actually, some main points that we should mention, regarding about sustainability. So the cooperativism is born with this sort of, so when we compare with other companies, I joke around like the normal companies. That's how we feel like the capital. For example, I really important not for my traditional company to talk about social and environment. But the cooperativism is from ground zero with both of them inherited. Another thing that really helps us working with sustainability is sustainability focusing on the user or on the associate. So we don't have to be like in competition, have to um, um, the person that in another country. So everyone is more aligned, so it's easier. It's more user-centric. We don't have like the profit and the ending out of it. So I really like the housing cooperative. It's very clear that their main goal is to have a similar level everyone's had. So they don't want like to sell to make profit. So here in the zone, we visit, I think during one afternoon, 5 or 6 cooperatives that people live in housing. Another very important point is that the families, they come with the part of the complement in they were sitting at the very, New York City Hall talking about strategies for the Brazil. They complement each other in a very entrepreneurship way. From the economic point of view, it's Brazil, the gas, the intermediaries, from the social point of view, I worked with a lot of different city, and they are far beyond, you know, distribute power. It's something that it's very empowering, We come from the management. There is a hierarchy around, but we have to have education as baseline, and this needs to be along with this type of the environment issues. We still kind of going into we have a focus in the middle term and I don't have like to pay bonus at the end of the day. I can do investments in a long term. The core business really help us out, having a important pillar because we really interested in the social part of it and the distribution that I've already. And then just to complement some of our learning, both from the platform cooperatives that we are. I had the opportunity to do research in 2020 about the democratic participation in the platform cooperative. And I found that there's a lot regarding testing. There's more than 65 things that are putting in the forum. What are the interesting topics that we so no, we haven't seen once a year. No, how can I say? It's absolutely participation. It's a very democratic participation. So my dream is that we want to, see on the app, what you say, I'm going to person, but we should be able to go with the app right or to have to bring the technology close and be sharing management. So we still have a long way to go. And let's put it this way, when we talk about small cooperatives that in Brazil we have 10 million associates making an because they have registration 400,000 people voting every year. not perfect, but it's a lot of efforts being that I really think that the platform cooperativism can inspire the traditional ones and the other way around. When we think about it, we are not talking about our neighbors, but we're talking about worldwide. So how can we actually, work with this internationalization? We can rescue the social fairness, So I'm very excited about this topic. We have to remind ourselves that, like, in the 1800s, we already had the famine when women time. So we have to rescue this diversity issues that was part of the beginning of all of these and other infrastructures that we have. For example, if they are democratic, then that they will happen, that they need to be shared, the code to be a common property. Besides different practices that we have to have. And then my last uh, is I don't think it's either one or the other. We always say in the traditional cooperative is that the biggest challenge is not the cooperative, but it's the lack of knowledge. So let's work together so more people will be familiar with the cooperativism movement.
Muito obrigada, Camila.
Thank
Uma aula
Camila.
muito bom, muito
So much.
importante. Agora eu passo a palavra para o Rafael, para que ele possa trazer as contribuições.
Boa noite a todo mundo. Ainda bem, finalmente, Sibeli, a gente
Good evening, everyone. Well, finally, we are here. It's so good to be here with Trevor and Camila. Camila, I met her when I was in Rio Grande do Sul, and I'm already inviting a bunch of people to come to Rio, in the Museu da Manhã next week. So there, I will be delivering a lecture on the platforms in Latin America, but I'm not going to give any spoilers, okay? So Camila and Trevor, I will tell you guys how I got involved. And I've always been interested in research, and I've always wanted to be involved in this team. And I think we all have our own reasons, and the reasons diverge. So I think this is the power of the movement that we are starting here. So there is a report of Rafael Zanata. Rafael Zanata's report was translated. Maybe Sibeli could find the link and share it on YouTube. But anyway, I graduated from media and journalism and communication in general, and I did have a lot of troubles with working as a journalist, and I didn't want to be in the gig economy. The gig economy was very challenging, actually. So it turned a key to me, it was like it rang the bell to me, because I wanted to have better work environment back in 2015. So I decided to criticize a liberalism, but no, instead of criticizing the current model, I decided to do differently. I decided to think of alternatives. So there was a boom of independent people, independent researchers in July 2013. And in July 2013 was a big milestone for Brazil. And one of the questions I asked myself was, why did we have alternative media journalists, and why didn't we have co-ops for journalists? So anyway, I started doing research on that, and I found out that in Argentina, Spain, especially in Catalonia, we had several co-ops for journalists in Argentina, Buenos Aires. There was a newspaper, a left-wing newspaper there, when Cristina was replaced by Macri, and then Macri stopped financing the subsidizing the newspaper. So we had a classic case there in the cultural industry. There were several experiences in Argentina, also in Spain. And because of the cultural aspects and the journalism issues, I started getting closer and closer and more interested in the platforms. I started in 2012 and reading all these texts in 2012, 10 years ago. And then I read Rafael Zanata's book as well, published in Portuguese. So anyway, I was very interested in all the communication platforms. I have a map that I can share the link with you guys. So the traditional communication platforms around the world, especially in Argentina and Spain, they did not know anything about the platform co-ops. So and I mean from a broader perspective, because they didn't use the same proprietary softwares, the community radio stations. They didn't understand the potential of this movement. There were very few initiatives. So anyway, obviously, we already have some co-ops, some platforms, but let me share the map, the link of this map with you guys. So this is what I understood. Besides this map,
dois orientadores meus fizeram toolkit como uma espécie de uma resposta a esse desconhecimento de comunicadores, de trabalhadores da comunicação em relação ao próprio cooperativismo no Brasil. E era muito comum, a gente chegava em sala de aula, falava, gente, o que vocês conhecem de iniciativas de mídia cooperativa? Nada. Ele falou, então é preciso que a gente comece a fazer com que mais pessoas conheçam essas iniciativas, porque a gente só vai conseguir também, seja do ponto de vista, inclusive, mais amplo da inovação, ou de se pensar o que a gente vai trazer.
Understand, what you're bringing, so to familiar with other initiatives. And then I think that we have to, I think that this is very important. So we've made regarding the communication platform. So they gotta get to know both the movement and more broader platform cooperativism. And then from this onwards, we believe that we talk about it, but people are not familiar with, and then the table is born out of it. I found out that I was trying, I'm trying to organize and create content. More people would be familiar with the movement in Brazil. So then we started, the interview events that we work with. And then last year, we also worked with the Observatory of the Cooperative platform to create content so people outside of the traditional cooperativism or academic environment familiar with those initiatives, those principles, and what has been developed. Along my journey was less in the journalism or in the communication and more related to think about the work of the platform that explodes even more during the pandemic, in the last 2 years, especially. So the topic itself become a, a trend topic. We have not only to just evaluate whatever is going on. So, for example, we have some research on click farm or people that, they keep likes all day long on Instagram or TikTok. They have for like 0.005 cents, human robots that feed parasites, not only this deep web, also to show alternatives, to think about the possible gap. Okay, I've been working not only on platform cooperativism research, but also with the Ferrer project that we created in Brazil that evaluates the main platforms all over the world, comparing different work. Interesting. People tell me, Rafael, you do a lot of things, but they are linked to one another because the principle work that are used to evaluate the huge platforms, it can be very useful to think about platforms of cooperative platforms. So this fair work, I think that it's better, to talk about contracts management. They updated their principles so that one of the main would be the support. So thinking about it, how the platform could work. So still in the main report, the main platforms had a maximum of 2 out of 10. iFood 99 and Uber with 1. Rappi get. People look at it and they say, and this is going to be fantastic for the translator, translate forever, because it's what I call the ideology of Essa da Mata, that there's no way along, or we can go like the huge Abysmal Hotel, which are just some songs. That means that there is no way around. So we need to build, so that in years we have platforms that are, scoring better than the. So I'm more interested in it, and I'm inviting people from Rio. So we have a family in Rio. So for me, there works. So we are about this topic. How to think about this cooperative.
It has to do with social justice and also how we can contribute to social justice, of course. Well, another interesting point has to do with the policies. There are several authors that mention policies and how those co-op platforms can be a place to build a world that we want for the future. So to build our future. And this is something that we can discuss in Rio, by the way. So it's very aligned with James Muldo's book and how he talks about platforms. He talks about platforms as being experiences, as being prototypes. So platforms are prototypes. We think that, okay, will these platforms work? What does it mean to work? How can we replace platforms? Some journalists, they come to us and they ask us questions like that, as if the platforms weren't efficient or something like that. And they think, okay, but this initiative only has 10 members. I mean, how can this work? But it's under construction. I mean, it's still a small group of people. But let's say if I'm a traditional researcher and I look at the organization from an organization point of view, with different stakeholders and different institutions which have different people involved. I think this is the point. Diversity is the point. Not only the academics, workers, social politicians, but anyway, I think as a whole, the deliveries, when you look at delivery boys and the co-ops in Brazil and in Spain, or Brazil and Argentina, how do we converge? How do we talk to one another? And how us as researchers, we build ethical relationships, and what kind of dialogue do we have? What are we building as far as communication channel? Because we want to build a community between academics, workers, people engaged in social movements, and so on. And in Brazil, I think we are, it's a very great momentum. We have a great momentum now, especially in terms of politics. I really hope that the outcome of these elections will be good, because we have real concrete possibilities to build some of the things that we wanted to build, especially in regards to public policies, in regards to public power, the solidary economy as a whole. I think we can have this as a national discussion topic. And this is one of the most interesting things that I see happening in the upcoming years. And also, before talking about public policies, one of the strongest points of platform co-ops and platforms is the scale. So the scale, when you scale, you can have more scale. I'm sorry, if you have more people involved. I can't think of the word of this person, Francesca Martinelli. Francesca Martinelli once said that co-ops are not unicorns. They think with a collaborative mindset. I can think of this company that started in co-op that started in Europe. And in Europe, they have some local delivery people, like 10 or so. I was in Berlin and Barcelona, and I got to know a little bit more about this co-op. They share the same infrastructure, the same software, the same app, which belongs to the Confederation. So they all use only one app, the Coop Sign app. Even if you are in Berlin, Paris, Barcelona, you can use the same app. And the interesting thing about this is a question that technologies are not neutral. When this technology comes to Latin America, and this is going to be discussed in Rio, especially in Argentina, they have a strong tradition of technology confederation. And this software was designed by a guy in Europe, a guy who grew up in very narrow streets. And this app doesn't work in Sao Paulo because Sao Paulo is a huge city. It has those really wide streets. And Denise Gasparian also mentioned it in one of her articles. She's going to be in Rio. It's about thinking locally, right? You got to think locally, and in order to implement certain things in Latin America, you got to have a Latin American mindset. So in Mexico, Argentina, we have this mindset. We need to think locally. And this is one of the points that I believe to be quite important, the relationship between the technology movement and the workers, especially the delivery boys. this movement is important because Brazil has a strong history of digital rights and having free software. When Gilberto Gil wrote that song, he defended the digital world for everyone and the digital world as part of our culture. We already have a few elements to connect the dots and to, let's say, season this dish, like we say in Portuguese, right? So anyway, it's an cooperation among countries and sectors. So it's interesting to look at the two initiatives that are going to be in Rio, Senhoritas Courier, women from the LGBT community, and they offer delivery services. There is even a documentary about them. And the MTST is a movement for people who don't have land to grow their crops. So anyway, there is a core of technology, a technology core. If you have a urban technology movement, imagine having this movement that is worried about the co-ops. This is amazing. And when you look at the platforms co-ops concept, you must take into account the core of the MST. It's not a co-op and it's not a platform in a sense of a mainstream platform, but it is there. It's fighting, it's struggling to build alternatives based on their principles. And this is so interesting because we can really make a difference and have takeaways. We don't have these technologies, they don't come ready. We need to develop them based on the needs, based on what they need to do. There is another case, Les Mercedes in Barcelona. They say, what does it mean to think of the platforms from a gender perspective? Not only to build, to add value to work, but also taking into account artificial intelligence, justice. We have a vast agenda to follow in the upcoming years, but we need to keep learning from these examples.
Rafael, let me jump in there.
I remember.
Yeah, is that all right to jump in?
Tem algum problema interromper sua fala? Alguma coisa, algum problema? Não, né?
Translation? No. Yeah, no, I just want to jump in. Okay, no, I don't know. Sometimes the translation disappears, so I can't really hear everything. Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I wanted to go maybe back to what Camilla said, right? Because I think there were so many interesting things that you both brought up. I think, you know, Camilla talked about like Rochdale, like maybe as relation to socialism, right? And I think this is something that I think it's really interesting in this movement, right? Because it's really not merely a progressive movement, right? It's not under the banner of socialism or platform socialism, right? This is maybe what you or I, or maybe some of us, right, might want to see, right? I personally do. But that's not what is reflected in the movement, which is much more a patchwork of many different ideologies and people coming from very, very different backgrounds. And I think, again, picking up what Camilla said, right? So for some, this is really an economic movement, right? This is about getting steaks in the freezer, right? And for other people, it's really, it's an anti-capitalist project, right? So, and those things coexist also with a really strong spiritual tradition, right? So I mean, there is when you look at, well, Spain obviously with Mondragon, right, having a Catholic origin, right, founded by a Catholic priest, and still today being like very strongly rooted in Catholic culture, right? Not so much religion, but culture. Or when you look to India, right, you have the oldest worker cooperative, ULCCS, being rooted, being founded essentially by a guru, right? So very much linked to spiritual traditions as well. So this weird, I think that's just something that's very, that's I think important to point out, right? And I think that also gets us to this question of, you know, like academics, like sitting in their office in a way, sort of thinking about like, you know, what workers should really need, right? So I think that, you know, that we as like scholars or so should really be very aware of that, right? And that in a way that what we have to contribute, I think that communities know what they need already for the very most part, right? And very often, what they need is really capital, right, to get these ideas realized. And I think also, and I think that's very important to me to say here, is that it's not really about like creating more and more cooperatives, right? And it's not about just merely a growth of the cooperative movement or so, right? But it's really about the well-being of people, right? And so whichever way you can get that done, right? So I mean, platform co-ops play a role in it, co-ops play a role in it, like, you know, Fair Work plays a role in it. And what is, I think, so important is to not do these, what we call like circular firing squads. I don't know if that translates well into Portuguese. So basically all these progressive groups sort of feuding each other, right? But like to understand that we really should work together, right? That unions should work together with cooperatives, that, you know, projects like Fair Work should be as closely as possible, right? Work with platform cooperatives, so that we have like a more of a unity, right? And really build a broader movement, right? That is not just limited to people interested in cooperatives. I think that's, there was so much more about open source, which is really, it's a super interesting other topic, because most platform co-ops are not open source, right? They're not free software, they're not open source, and there's a good reason for that. When I talked to the workers, right, they said like, well, you know, look, we, you know, for us, it's really about, you know, like feeding ourselves, right? It's our daily business, like to run this business. And that's just not their first priority, right? And so I think that's important. We also need to emphasize that there have been a lot of use of peer production licenses, much more than open source. So source available code, right? So basically making the source available, but only commercially usable by other cooperatives. That I think is really interesting, right? It's what Co-op Cycle does. And yeah, and there I think it's, and also responding to Raphael, it's I think really important to have very much an internationalist view, right? Internationalist approach, while also thinking locally, right? Because I think it's an absolute trap to think that that co-ops are like a local project, right? They are. But without this sort of global thinking, right, and the use of global platforms, right, and being open to use and build on the platforms that people in Paris or in New York or somewhere else have built, right, I think is a problem, right? I think people always starting from scratch is a problem. And also picking up on what Camilla said, right, I completely agree, right? So there's so much idealism, there's so much activism, but what is so often forgotten is the business side of things, right? And so where you have very idealistic people pushing businesses and not really having the expertise to do that, right? And so they just need to be aware of that, right? That all of these platform cooperatives, first of all, are businesses, right? I mean, they have to survive as businesses. Otherwise, you have what you saw with some failing platform co-ops that spent years on their bylaws because they were just so in love with democracy and they were just so in love with this idea of governance, right? And they produced the best bylaws you can get and then failed. as a project, right, as a business. So so that's, well, just my 2 cents, just to jump in a little bit. So I think internationalism, like a strong business case. We are currently working on a series for 2023, which entirely focuses on business models, right? So only like 1, 2, 3, if you want to start a business in the taxi and with a taxi as a platform cooperative, like what do you do? We are like very, very practically. I think that is very much needed and absent. I think Camilla is absolutely right, you know. So. Not sure if this is something to pick up on there. Rafael.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, actually. And just to wrap it up, so Sibeli can ask the questions. As scholars, we have to, sometimes we have this idea of this ideal world for platforms. I remember when I was in Argentina, there was a newspaper that was very famous because they were very resistant to what was happening at the time. And I spent 2 weeks there interviewing people, and somebody said something very remarkable. They said to me, one of the journalists, I'm tired of seeing scholars trying to say things like, oh, you're such warriors, you're amazing people. We are not prince or princess. We are struggling to survive. And from my point of view, I think we think of potentials, but we think of limits, and we give feedback to people, constantly give feedback to people because we are scholars. Anyway, so I think it's we have this idea that everybody's wonderful and great, and she corrected me because I thought everybody was great there. But anyway, what do we hope? I think it's important to have hope, okay? The event that we had in Porto Alegre designed a plan of action, an action plan for Brazil, and you can access this. It's already available, and our purpose is to have a Brazilian plan for the platforms. It's nothing new, to be quite honest, but I think we can already use the existing platforms so that we don't separate debate from smart cities or debate from labor work. I think what we can do, obviously, we are going to keep on hearing the decision makers, but I think each city can have their own Uber version, let's put it this way. So
let's say that someone gossips, we love gossips. Please let us know about it. Oh, I love it myself as well. So we're talking about, the elections. So let's, say one Uber for each single place. No, that's not what we're talking about. This is wrong already. And the solution is not for every single city to build their own app, That's why we are talking about, meetings, intercorporations, and so on. And a kind of fetish that you have on the public sector, that once you create an app, you solve all the problems. So it's a little bit of how we can offer those relationships. So we can keep on talking about it next week in Rio. Okay, guys, so thank you so much for your participation. I truly believe that I'm not sure if anyone would ask a question for someone that is here. Camila, Tebor, Rafael, anyone? Would you like to ask a question? Yes, I do have a question for Trevor. I would like to Trevor to let us know what are his expectations for the meeting in Rio. You know, what we can expect for this event and so on.
Well, it has so many layers, right? So I think for one, it will be just wonderful to see everybody that we know already. I think, you know, these conferences are often the best things happen outside of the sessions, right? This is when people meet and have a drink together, right? And this is how friendships happen, and out of friendships come projects, and out of projects come businesses, and the ecosystem develops, right? And well, I think there's a link perhaps, right? Like to, so that what we have done for the last 8 years, you know, with like really in countries all over the world, right? Like from Japan to, you know, Indonesia, Germany, you know, Spain, to bring some of these insights and contribute them, right, to the work that is done already, but in a way that is, you know, obviously not as helicoptering in and very much aware of being, you know, not having a full understanding of Brazil. So this is amazing. That's why it's so amazing the work that you are doing, Rafael. It's such a so important, right, and like so influential, and I think also beyond Brazil. And I think, yeah, I mean, like to hear, I really look forward, our research fellows will all be there, and they will talk about their projects, linking, you know, there's a lot of research on blockchain and the cooperative data trusts. So I'm curious about those. I can't wait to see and meet and hug the Brazilian cooperators, right, to see those projects and learn more about them and meet the people. I look forward to the samba and hopefully dancing with you and getting to learn a bit about that. And yeah, so I mean, I don't know, there's so much going on there, right? We will try this experiment, which I've heard is very uncommon in Brazil. So we try to always experiment with formats, right? So to not have these sort of dusty traditional academic models of conferences, instead to sort of experiment. And one of the things we do is to create an unconference, right, already on the first day, which is where we let anyone in the audience basically is able to create their own lecture within the framework of this conference, right? So there's 2 hours where essentially we will create 6 spaces within the museum, and you know, we will topically assign people to each of these spots, and people can spontaneously walk in and basically say, I want to talk about, you know, blockchain and Brazil, and or female feminist servers in Brazil, you know, any topics they want. And they are basically spontaneously assigned and give these talks, right? So that's one of the things that I look forward to, and I hope it will work out. I'm a bit nervous about it because I think I was told that there's not much of a tradition of that in Brazil. It's quite a common format here. So yeah, that's a start. I don't know. And of course, the ideal outcome would be that there is something that is lasting, right? Because we've done this so often, and these events are always amazing, right? They're always, I mean, what can go wrong, right? You have amazing people in the room. So I mean, the potential for failure of an event like that is very small. But what's much more important, so that's great for the people at the event, right? But what happens beyond that, and how can that be consequential, right? And I think it can be consequential if an institution comes out of it, right? An institution that really sees itself linked to the internationalist project, right? And is like sort of really open to that, right? Rather than sort of starting to create, I mean, it's very important to create and acknowledge the Brazilian context, and that things are of course very different in that sort of South American context. But at the same time, I think it's very important to really learn the ample amount of lessons that we learned with these hundreds of projects we worked with, you know. So I think an institution essentially, like in a way, the ones that you built, Raphael, right? To really create an anchor institution that is lasting and stays, maybe also after you move to beautiful Canada, and becomes a go-to place in Brazil, also when you are gone, or we are all gone. So like there needs to be like a physical space where people can go and they can learn about this, right? And this is really important. And it's important also to have these sort of values continue, right? Like they are present through an institution, right? So like a lesson I think we learned from the police violence and the police protests, right? In the United States, where there was so much killing, right, of African Americans, and still happening now. And there was there were all these protests, right, to abolish the police, and very little actually happened, right, because once these protests dispersed, right, these kind of voices weren't really institutionalized, right? So I think these institutions are really important, right? Institutions that anchor experiences and anchor knowledge and research and awareness, right? That are persistent. So I think that's a great hope, right? And hopefully to show also the policymakers in Brazil that, this has been taken up, right, by the Social Democrats in Germany, the second largest people's party in the country. This has been taken up by the Labour Party. This has been taken up by, a large party in India and other countries, right? So, and they should see that they should take this seriously, and that this should really be part of their landscape. So that's, I think, my closing. I should end with a Robert Owen quote. I'm sure I have one. But maybe I saved that for Rio. But Camila.
Fantastic. Okay, I was just waiting to see if Sibeli wanted to ask a question. Yes, I do have a few questions, but I just would like to know first from you guys, if you do have any other questions among yourselves, or if I should go ahead and start with the questions from outside. What do you prefer? I think that you can go ahead and ask the questions.
Can I ask Camila something?
Yes, I think that you can go ahead and start, Camila, because you took notes regarding the topic that we just talked about it. So go ahead, Camila. I think you can go ahead and start. Okay, so I'll wait for Trevor's question and then I'll go on it.
Camila, Camila, we met so many years ago, I think at the OCB Congress, right? And then before that in Silicon Valley, where I talked with all these transportation leaders of cooperatives. So I, associate so much with OCB, right? With the Sistema OCB. And I just wonder what you see the role of the co-op movement, the institutional co-op movement being in relation to these emerging projects. Maybe where you can see the opportunities and maybe also the limitations.
Certo. Então, eu acho que...
Okay, so I think that one of the things that we have it that sometimes is not as positive, and I thought it was very cool that in the event that Rafael made here in Porto Alegre, we had both representatives from institutions, from Cisco, for example, and also, and mainly because Unicinos is related to the solidary economy. So I think that it's kind of like, for example, I work with this point of view to work with something that is like co-op with a huge environmental impact. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to offer a 70% discount for someone who is a woman from one of these co-op who does like, manual working, and she says, no, I don't want to be associated to this movement, for example. So we end up, and I think that we have a few, movements that are more related, to, let's say, if it's Catholic or if it's something regarding to other issues. But from my experience, we have to wreck the system. And I noticed that UCP is doing that in a way that, for example, in a political way. So if we do need to act on the legislation with movements that we need to be heard, because the laws of the co-op here in Brazil are back from 71. And if you take a look now on our Brazilian government, for example, the new generations, they are not familiar with the cooperativisms. So we have to insist on it. So we have to talk to the politicians, we have to get close to them, even though if we don't agree with all of them. But I think that independently of who is right there in the Congress, we cannot allow them to forget the co-op from our sake and for the society's sake. And I think that this is an opportunity that we do have to intercorporate, like Rafael has mentioned, and the traditional cooperativism done it, and it does it quite well. They do it, how can I say, with intention. They are approaching the government with intention, and they are getting a lot of benefits out of it. And I think that here in Brazil, we work with the S system that we call, which is using a percentage of the money from the co-op, it's sent to the system, and well, I work in a co-op, and we have a lot of benefits because of these systems. So I'm not sure how it is in different countries, but for those who are in the co-op environment, they have a lot of access to education. So if you look at a scope of where Mario, for example, works, we have like graduation free of charge. The university is free of charge for a worker scope here from Porto Alegre, that they clean the city, So this type of access, we are able to get it with intercorporation, and working together with these institutions. So people from Conecta, and I'm talking about Gustavo and his team, they were participating in a congress in Belo Horizonte last week. I was there as well, and they were mapping the innovation and the startups that are co-ops. But it's not a different network. The same way that we inspire ourselves on the blockchains, it's another branch of this network that should be aligned. So I think all of those networks, they should be connected within the social area. And with opportunities, I think that this part that like there is no we and them and other denominations, but mainly we should be able, to work with those that are in the market for a longer period. For example, trans co-ops, Rafael will work with open innovation platforms. They will start working with innovation reasons. So I've been to an incubator to talk about it, to ask why don't we as a co-op invest in a traditional incubator, and we don't promote or stimulate platform cooperatives or companies that are linked to technologies that organize themselves in co-op. So we don't have that much going on. And I think that the movement, which is quite huge, could help. One of my experience that I had in Argentina was that I had a research environments and applied actions that were related to a cooperative. And I think that these logics, as you were saying, like the dots are there. We just have to connect the dots. We have to be more united. And another question that I made a note out of it are the curiosities that I have for the future. And I think that we should talk more about it during the conference. So one of the topics that I've been working on my daily basis is how we can actually organize ourselves within the organizations. So if they are self-managed, if they work with sociocracy, so we as Corp, we could be an example for this type of organization. But we talk a lot, but we don't practice that much. So I practice some of those movements, especially when we're talking about tech in my daily basis. And sometimes I think that is curious that, you know, someone will come along and tell me, for example, that sometimes it's not about, oh, I love this type of platform, what I can make out of it so I can open my co-op. And it's not the other way around, as we're saying. It's like, what do I need to solve that in the format SSA limited makes more sense to be more democratic? So I only realized this when I was doing my master's back in 2015. I was studying with a social, in an institute for social banking. It was in Germany. So I was familiar with the GLS Bank, Triadus Bank as well. And they've mentioned that it was a French credit cooperative. And they've mentioned that for them, the co-op was not as romantic as I'm saying here. It was more traditional. It was more like, oh, it's all the same. It's all bank related. And it's not like us Brazilians that we are, or even Americans, you know, they're very passionate about it, you know, with the credit corp, having like a more social side of it. So I asked for this person, you know, they were financing, you know, solar panel regarding, you know, environmental issues, but they chose to be a cooperative. And I asked them, why, you know, if you could be, for example, a open bank and to do like financial transactions to finance, you know, other environmental issues, why not to be an SA unlimited? And he replied to me saying that, no, our first willingness was to finance people that really want to change the world. And the way to work as cooperative co-op for us made sense because money is power. But if we can find a way to distribute this money evenly, we can transform money into love. And then at that moment, I realized that right there, they were working in a more objective way with choosing co-op instead of, you know, a regular business, because he was getting what really meant the most for him, which was, you know, to give democratic power into money. So this is one reflection that I've made, and we have to talk a lot about it, you know. So we have to be passionate by the environment where we are, but sometimes, you know, we have to look towards the final goal. Why are we doing that for, you know? And then we start having like the traditional discussions that we have with the co-ops, you know, numbers, are we really, you know, going after our purpose? Are people living better because of our business? So let's measure these into numbers. Are those platforms who have good scores? And my experience, for example, in sustainability movements is that sometimes we are not able to have a company that is starting, you know, to pay, have a registered work. Sometimes because of right at the beginning of the creative economy, you know, to give like a absence, paid absence for pregnancy, for example, because people cannot afford it. So we still have different chapters to go into, you know, we still have to experience this practice that we are collecting from different places.
Rápidos comentários e uma fofoca no final também. Meus dois comentários são seguindo.
I have a brief comment and a gossip at the end. So Camila, you talked about the incubator, right? And I've been very interested in incubators and in the potential of universities in Brazil, because we can have incubators in the universities. I'm from São Paulo. I spent 3 years in Rio Grande do Sul state. It was a time I spent at Unicinos, and I learned a lot about co-ops. And I asked, how many co-ops do you have? How many incubators do you have? I asked myself that question, and how can we turn the key? How can we switch the mindset? There is a different logic behind incubators, and I think I have an inspiration from a project called Match Impulse. I will send you the link. By the way, there is a video as well. It's a project from the University of Catalonia, along with the City Hall administration, so that they can promote the solidary economy there. And they also approach the gender topic. So anyway, how they give training to people, they provide training to people, and also focus on initiatives that are quite interesting. We have a lot to learn from Match and Pulse, and also from these projects coordinated by this group of the University of Catalonia. Anyway, the second point I wanted to mention has to do with the context of the Brazilian society, which is called the fake co-ops. We called coppercats, co-op cats. So they are fake. There is this concept of fake co-ops in Brazil, and they think that the legislations are the way they are now because of the co-op cats. So it was just a facade. These co-ops were just facades, and they were actually opened to take advantage, to get advantage from the system. Anyway, they want to be innovative. They want to have a decent work, to show decent work, that they do decent work. But I have no doubt in my mind that one of the big platforms will choose to have a third party responsible for founding a co-op. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Trevor is saying that the copcats, they are not only in Brazil, but they are all over the world. But here is quite evident, and because of the situation, we have to change the legislations. Anyway, I will tell the gossip later, okay? I will leave the gossip for later. All right, what I was going to say has to do with a question, but anyway, what I was going to say is we are involved in this topic, and this is a question, a very serious question, and it hasn't been solved yet, but I hope it will be solved, because people are getting in touch with the content and getting familiar with the content. And there is another point of view, which is the legal point of view. We have the legal perspective of what a co-op should be like. And we know that for these people who are involved in platform co-ops, this is a very complex matter, because they try to organize themselves in a way that is not aligned with the legal demandings and bindings. So Camila and Rafael, Trevor, maybe you guys could mention, could give your opinion. But anyway, your values, right? Do you think your values would be enough to sustain the the model, the co-op platform models, or ideally would be to have a legal a legislation, a special legislation for co-ops, a new legislations that would be changed and would also take into account the contemporary model, work market model, labor market. I don't know if you understood my question. I wasn't able to ask my question, but it has to do with legal. It has to do with legal aspects and also with the existing models that we have now in our legislations. Thank you. That's it, guys.
I can jump in quickly, yeah, that's okay. No, I think so. I think that's so. If you have to have the regulators on your side, right? I think that's absolutely key. So and we see this in. I always dream of this sort of alliance of the municipalities that are actually really supporting this, right? Which you can really see from Emilia-Romagna, right, to the Netherlands and Denmark and Spain, right, or the Basque Country and Catalonia at least, and to Kerala, right, and now starting in Indonesia, other places. So like that we actually create a commons, right, where we can sort of compare and share policy ideas, right? So this is what we tried with our policy paper. I mean, Rafael added his take on Brazil for Brazil, right? So I think that's incredibly important, and without them, I think you cannot succeed. Yeah. Just to start with, right? Yeah. We have these specific ideas, but this is not the time to share them. Maybe this has to wait for Rio. Yeah.
Eu por muito tempo.
Okay, for a long period, I was involved in the democratic participation in the law itself. So my experience with it is that I was without hope that we could do, for example, a digital assembly. And then I used to work with it. And then I would say, but guys, currently people are actually logging into the co-op through an app. They are able to purchase or sell through an app, but they are not able to vote, to participate in it. So I'm not, doing a double role in here. And we're talking about a regulation from January 5th, 1971. They never could imagine that things would come to the pace that they are today. And then the pandemic came along, and then boom, everything worked. But then we also had a legislation regarding, which department you work with. For example, I cannot open a co-op if I'm not in my area, because if I had to vote, I had to vote in about 50K radius, for example. But we could never imagine that we could escalate this with technology. So there is still a lot to be discussed. For example, we're talking about financing. We know that currently it's quite complicated to start a platform co-op with the resources from the workers, because if usually when they get together is because they are not, wealthy enough, to invest in technology. So this is the startups model, the traditional startups model, someone from outside comes in with the money, but they don't work in it. But for the co-ops, that's not the way it works. In order for you to be part of the co-op, you have to produce. And then the return that you have, it's proportional to your production. So I think that not only we have the legal part that we have to say, look, it's officially a co-op. I think that it's important and it's very different, but there is no doubt that law needs to be updated. that we have to take different steps in order to do it, I think that it's essential, you know. And then we come to the point that we're discussing previously, you know. We have to be able to play the game. I think that we're going to have to play the game in order to do the changes that are required, because unfortunately, as Rafael Bruno has mentioned, if we are not official a co-op, then we're not part of the game. We know we might be an inclusive co-op, but I think there is a huge challenge in it, you know. It's not even one or two or platform corporate. We're talking about, you know, environment co-ops that they wanted to develop products and service, but they were not able, you know, to become a co-op because of those issues. So I think that we have to look from this point of view to allow the creative economy or the social economy to become more cooperatives. I think that we should discuss all of this. And this goes along with the knowledge of the society that are familiar or not familiar with the co-op. Because there's no point of we talking, oh, it's bad because of this or that, you know, but we need people to have the knowledge, you know, about what they're talking about, you know, who are the candidates who have to work on it, because we are very tiny comparing to everything that we could do. So society needs us. That's what I wanted to say. I just want to add something regarding the legislation. Of course, I'm not from the law, is not my baseline, but if we have to think about, you know, in the future government, independently of who will be elected, you know, and I'm going to actually tell a gossip here. Right after we launched the Fair Work report here in Brazil, the Ministry of Labor called us saying that the Ministry of Bolsonaro's government wants to talk to us. So I went there and I spoke to them, and they told me that they want to put some regulations on the platforms. So the issue here is not regulations versus non-regulations, is that every single one has a different point of view of what regulation means on a platform. So if we're talking about the platform, if we're talking about the ministry, if we're talking about the government, we have different senses of what is the regulation. So the topic of regulation will come to us, will come to the Brazilian Congress next year. So we have to think about the legislation of the co-op. And when we'll be talking about the legislation of it, we have to think in a way that will be at the same time non-inhibitors of the new players, but should also be certified in terms of, you know, principles, values, and to be actually a co-op. So it's not an easy game to play. So we have to somehow put ourselves into context. And the Fair Work soon in Brazil should also release a policy paper about how do we face this situation. I just like to add on to it, on what Teber has just mentioned in our chat. He mentioned about the startups, that the interesting point would be that it should have some similarity with the more traditional startups and the platform co-ops. So I have to say that I'm not really familiar with that, but with the startups legislations, but I'm not sure if we can adapt this model. So if you can use this to go beyond the legislation of the co-ops, I'm not sure about it. So are you familiar with this legislation of the startups? Is it a model that we could go ahead and use it?
It's the same in, I think the problems that you describe in Brazil are very, very similar in so many other countries, right? I mean, in Japan, they just introduced worker cooperatives, I think, a year ago, maybe a bit longer. Like in Indonesia, that's not even the case, right? And I think like another comment, though, I mean, I think we need to be open to people running incorporated in other forms as well. So I think a sort of co-op purism is also not so helpful, right? Because I mean, what are the people supposed to do in Brazil, right? I mean, you can't have a legal platform co-op, really, right? So how are they supposed to do this, right? So I think the question is more like, what are the outcomes, right? And there I would try to like really emphasize and support, in particular, multi-stakeholder and worker cooperatives, right? Because these models are not all the same, right? So co-ops in themselves are not all supportive of social justice issues, right? So if you care about social justice, I think those platform co-ops might have to be or are likely to be multi-stakeholder or worker platform cooperatives. But if you can't legally set those up, you can also find other ways, like, and there are many platform cooperatives that run as limited liability corporations, and you wouldn't even know it, right? They act like worker co-ops, they talk about themselves as worker platform co-ops, but legally they are not, right? And so I think there are ways of shaping, so we are talking with Katarina Pistor, like a law professor at Columbia University, about like how you can use this LLC model in situations that don't allow people to set up legal cooperatives, right? It's not that we don't want to set them up, right? You literally can't, right? So it's not trying to avoid co-ops, right? It's more to say like, well, how do you help the people that can't do this right now? And those Delaware LLCs are legal anywhere where Delaware corporate legal, which is almost anywhere in the world. So you could operate that anywhere.
Eu queria comentar uma
So
questão.
I'd like just to comment regarding, there used to be a movement that we were studying on those sustainable co-ops and the issue that they were both stakeholders. So let's split the things. So currently, we can only have people that are associated in the co-ops, but the governance is slowly opening themselves for the external counselors, but more and more like a credit side of it, in order to be safe, to be reliable. Not so much from the point of view that we're talking about that we would be able to distribute, the power on the community. So, for example, other audience that live there. So in a more developed environment, in a small town, the board will be diverse. For example, in my building, there will be the accountant, the professor, the larger ones, but this knowledge, in order to have a good distribution, that group of associated will be a great representation of the society. It has to be, more intentional if you want the co-ops to be more sustainable. And I think that when we consider the platform co-ops movement that is just starting, what I noticed is that on my research, my master's research saw that if the co-ops, they practice the principles of the cooperativisms, they will be more sustainable, more related to social justice. But we don't really, ask them if they are working on that way. So for the co-op platforms, for them to stay on track, just like some of the traditional co-ops did, I think that's a great discussion. Great, you are a platform co-op, but you cannot, just forget about the social justice, the justice labor, the environment issues, the diversity issues, gender issues. So it's not like another demand for you to do it, but more than the legal side of it, that's what we're putting here. It's a concept that's going to be almost like a stamp. I worked for many years with the Bacon system as a volunteer, and I feel that the platform systems could be like a stamp saying that we are a digital co-op, we are sustainable, we are fair to everyone involved.
Exactly. And Trevor, you mentioned here that we all have principles, and these principles could be in a different legal format, that can be built differently. And this is one of the biggest topics when it comes to co-op platforms, and it's crucial as well at this moment. When I was in touch with this topic for the first time, I was very unfamiliar with the format. You have Kataki, mesmo Senhoritas, all these projects. When you look at the legal aspect, it's not a co-op from a legal point of view, and this is an important discussion to have, because when you see a platform should be aligned with legal aspects, and we should have legislations for platforms that make sense. Anyway, so I don't know if you have time for questions, but there is a book, the Platform Co-op was published by Fundação Rosa Luxemburgo. I'm not sure if you've read the book, but anyway, do you think they are going to publish a second edition of this book? Would you be able to answer this question? Is there anyone from Fundação Rosa Luxemburgo that could answer this question? And the second question is, just to wrap it up, in the event in Rio is going to be the International Seminar of Co-op Platforms. It has happened in several cities in the world, and is going to be in Rio the 4th, 5th, and 6th of November in Museu da Manhã. So do you think, or do you expect, that there will be a legacy behind because of this event? So what legacy will there be? A document or something like that? Is there a purpose to leave a legacy behind?
Yeah, so the outcomes are always very important to us, right? So we are not streaming it live because, I think people don't have to see this at the very same second as we are talking about it. They can see this like a week later. And so we will share, of course, the documentation, and we will share like we always do. You can find hundreds of interviews on our website, like these very short 3-minute interviews that we will do with all speakers. So that's already scheduled, and we will share those afterwards. There will be a symposium in February that will be focused on the outcomes of this event as part of a larger series that we are planning for the spring. That will also focus on India, where we've done 2 years of research. So we will have a project focusing on that, and then also on the Brazilian experience. And so hopefully, and hopefully there will be some sort of group that forms right out of this event, or strengthened existing groups, right? Not just forms out of this, but strengthen existing projects that will be part of this international movement, right? So with a strong understanding that, of course, South America is different, right? But I think it's the international aspect, the internationalist aspect is so important, right? Like to think that to really link this to existing efforts, you know, we have a group that's called the Solidarity Collaboratory. We just founded it, so that's why I have to think for a second. The Solidarity Collaboratory, which is basically a network of global platform co-ops, and they meet every month, right? And the idea is to coordinate, right? To help each other, right? And share technology and share bylaws and share insights, right? So just like that more of this sort of Brazilian work becomes really part of the international work, right? I mean, that's my hope for sure. Yeah.
Obrigada, Tebor.
Sobre o livro de autonomia literária, cooperativismo.
Yeah, there is a book about the book. I want to mention there is the PDF file version. I also have included the link here. I'm the link man, right? Anyway, but I don't know about the second edition, if they will publish the second edition, so I would not be able to answer that question. I'm sorry. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, Trevor, for your remarks. So now we have our final remarks, and as far as expectations and legacy, we have a few, of course. Rafael and Camila, do you have your final remarks in regards to that before we wrap it up? I think perhaps Trevor can talk about his book, his latest book. Why not, right? How about that, Trevor?
No, but you should say that this PDF that you talked about, that the book, that Rosa Luxemburg translation translated, is quite a few years old, right? So I think I wrote that in 2017, 16, 17, so it's a long time ago. But there's a new book, and of course there's Ours to Hack and to Own, which came out after that, and then there will be the new book, which will come out next year. It's called Own This, and comes out with Verso, and tracks a lot of these developments around the world. Yeah. So maybe that could be translated into Portuguese. I would love it, of course. Yeah.
Rafael, Camila, considerações finais para o encerramento?
Rafael, Camila, do you have your final remarks? Well, I would say my final remarks would be that if you don't know, or if you're not familiar with the topics that we discussed today, I hope you enjoyed the discussions we had. And it's so important to connect and make our network stronger. We are going to see each other in the upcoming year as well, not only next week, but in the upcoming year. And for next week, we will be in Museu da Manhã. It's an amazing museum, and we will have wonderful moments for networking and to chit-chat till late at night. I'm pretty sure of that, because we're going to be in Rio, right? So anyway, the gossip. I had to tell you a gossip. At the beginning of next year, we will have 2 cartoons, and the cartoons will explain it will be a manifest of co-op platforms, and it's going to be a scripted story of 2 short cartoons, animated movies, and it's going to be the same writer from Irmão Joel, and she has won several awards. Wow, that's so cool. Congratulations. Yeah, yeah. It's a way to get to other audiences and to explain to people in a more simple language. So anyway, We started working on this project yesterday, and it should be ready by January. Thank you, Sesc, so much. What an institution. You've been playing such an important role, and I'd like to congratulate you for your initiatives, Ludmila Costachiabilho, people talking about co-ops in Latin America, solidarity in Latin America, and the MTST course, which is something quite important for us to strengthen the institutions that we have in Brazil. As Trevor mentioned, the importance of strengthening institutions in Brazil. So anyway, I think I am hopeful. I'm hopeful that the word would be hopeful. And I already feel a little bit nostalgic as well, because when I talked about digitalization and I talked about co-op platforms, I remembered in my post-grad, there was this professor, 80 years old professor, and I was intimidated by him because he was so experienced, but it was the opposite. He was so excited about my thesis. So anyway, I feel the responsibility of carrying on with the co-ops. But I'm so proud, guys, of you, and I'm so proud of what's going to happen in Rio, because we are creating the co-op world for the future, and this is what we're doing, we're writing history. Thank you so much. Thank you. Trevor, do you have any final remarks to make before we close this event?
No, it would be wonderful if any of you listening can make it to Rio. I know it's not so easy for many of you. It's expensive and long distances and all of that. But if you can make it, I think it will be really worthwhile to come. I think it will be a really extraordinary event, and I'm sure really quite unusual and very different than the events you've seen before, like with art really playing a really big role, and with a lot of experimentation of formats, and really truly amazing speakers, like very outstanding Brazilian speakers and really brilliant global speakers as well. So we hope to see you there.
Muito obrigada, pessoal. Então, eu agradeço a presença do Trevor, da Camila, do Rafael.
So thank you so much. I'd like to thank for the presence of Trevor, Camila, Rafael, the interpreters, everyone who is doing the translations and the translations for the hand signs as well, everyone from SESC Avenida Paulista, everyone from the different units, from the administrations, everyone that collaborated for this activity to happen. And then I would like to remind that Futura project, it's here in SESC Paulista, and we still have 2 other activities in November. One of them is the debate about the book A Cultura Livre, Free Culture. It's a Leonardo Folletto book. This activity will be on November 10th at 7:30 p.m. here in our library, and we'll also exhibit a documentary on the 17th of November at 7 p.m. And then we're gonna have a chat with Isadora from the Design Possível and with Marcelo Justo from the Consinger Institute. So thank you so much for being here. And if you want to know more about our schedule, please go to sesc.com.br/Avenida Paulista and our Instagram and our Facebook on Sesc Avenida Paulista. I hope you all have a great night, and I'll see you in our next event. Thank you.